The morning of my mother's funeral, I stood at the bottom of the church steps when my Aunt Margaret pointed straight at me and said something I never imagined I would hear. "Hannah has died to this family, just like her mother." Her words tore through the cold air harder than the winter wind, and everyone around us froze. My name is Hannah Cooper, and at that moment, I realized something important. When someone tries to erase you from your own mother's funeral, it usually means they are desperately trying to hide a truth far bigger than you think. And that was the moment my real story began. I did not move when my Aunt Margaret turned away from me and guided the guests up the steps like nothing had happened. People whispered behind their hands. Some looked at me with pity, others with confusion, but no one stepped forward. No one said a word. Maybe they were scared of her. Maybe they just did not want to get involved in a family storm that clearly had been brewing for years. Either way, I stood there, 30 years old, watching the doors close on the woman who had given me life. My mother, Laura Cooper, deserved better than this circus. I took a step back, steadying myself. The cold from the stone pavement seeped through the soles of my shoes, but the humiliation burned hotter than anything the weather could offer. I reminded myself to breathe, because a part of me wanted to scream, another part wanted to cry, but the largest part, the one that had kept me alive through 2 years of caregiving, whispered something else. "Stand still. Do not run." Those were my mother's last real words to me. I did not understand them then, but standing outside that church, unwanted and uninvited to my own mother's funeral, I started to feel the meaning. Margaret had always been a presence in my life, but never warm. She married my father after my parents divorced, raised Ethan and Lily like fragile glass dolls, and treated me like a piece she inherited from a previous owner. Something to be tolerated, not loved. But even with all her coldness, I never imagined she would go this far. A uniformed security guard approached me slowly, his expression apologetic. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. We have been told to ask you to step away from the entrance." I nodded. I had expected this. Margaret never issued a threat she did not intend to enforce. It was her signature. Quiet cruelty, executed with perfect posture, and a smile meant for country club cameras. I stepped away from the church steps and moved toward the sidewalk, just far enough to avoid causing a scene. That was the thing Margaret feared most in life: public mess. She could handle private ugliness, but scandal was her kryptonite. She probably expected me to disappear meekly, the way I often did when I was younger, but today felt different. As I reached the street, a sleek black SUV pulled up. From the passenger seat stepped the one person I had not expected to see here. Henry Caldwell, my mother's lawyer. A man who spoke little, observed everything, and carried himself with the calm of someone who had seen more family betrayals than he ever cared to admit. He closed the door behind him, squared his shoulders, and walked toward me. Not toward the church, toward me. That alone told me something was wrong. "Hannah," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "I am very sorry for your loss." I nodded, unable to respond. The lump in my throat had settled there the moment Margaret said I was dead to the family. Caldwell glanced over my shoulder at the church doors. His jaw tightened slightly. Then he met my eyes with a look that felt like a warning. "Be at my office tomorrow at 3, he said quietly. "Do not be late. And do not speak to anyone from the Cooper family until then." I blinked. "Why? What is going on?" He shook his head just once. "Your mother was a very perceptive woman, Hannah. More perceptive than anyone realized. That is all I can say for now." A chill ran through me, colder than the wind ripping across the sidewalk. Before I could ask anything else, he stepped back, nodded politely, and returned to the SUV. The car pulled away without another word. I stood there, staring after it, my mind spinning. I had spent 2 years watching my mother fade away. I slept in hospital chairs, learned how to manage her medications, cooked meals that she could barely swallow. I held her hand through nights so long they felt like entire lives. And not once did she tell me she was hiding something. Not once did she act like there was unfinished business. But she had said one thing: "When truth comes, stand still." I had thought she meant grief, or maybe fear. Now I wondered if she meant this moment exactly, this doorway of exile, this forced silence, this humiliation crafted so perfectly by Margaret that it almost felt rehearsed. I looked back at the church. Through the stained glass windows, I could see the flicker of candles. Shadows moved inside. Ethan and Lily were probably already seated in the front row, performing the roles of grieving children for the crowd. They were good at pretending, better than anyone I knew. Ethan, the polished financial prodigy, always too busy for real relationships, especially with family. And Lily, the influencer princess, whose entire world existed through filters and sponsored tears. Neither of them had shown up during my mother's worst months, but both of them were here now, in perfectly coordinated black outfits, ready to be seen. I turned away. Watching them would only twist the knife deeper. Instead, I walked across the small parking lot behind the church and sat on a weathered wooden bench. A thin layer of frost covered it, but I did not care. The silence here was different, less judgmental, less crowded. Just me, the cold, and a grief that felt heavier than my own body. For a moment, I closed my eyes and pictured my mother the way she was before illness hollowed her out. Warm laugh, messy hair, hands that smelled like lavender lotion. She would not have wanted this. Not the family war, not the spectacle, not the separation at her own funeral. A part of me felt ashamed for even thinking about what Caldwell said. Why me? Why his secrecy? Why tomorrow? But another part of me, the part that had held my mother as she cried on nights she felt the world slipping away, knew the answer already. My mother had been preparing me for something I did not see coming. Margaret's words echoed again in my head. Hannah is dead to this family. Maybe she thought she was cutting me out, silencing me, erasing me from the final chapter of my mother's life. But as I sat there, the cold biting my skin, I realized something Margaret would never expect. Sometimes being pushed out of a story is the only way to discover the part that was hidden. And tomorrow, at 3 o'clock, I would learn exactly what that part was. Sleep did not visit me that night. I lay awake in the small guest room of my apartment, staring at the ceiling as the shadows of passing headlights crawled across it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret on the church steps again, her voice slicing through the cold morning, like she was announcing a cast list for a play. Hannah is dead to this family. I kept replaying the way people turned their heads, the way no one stepped in, and the way my own heart felt like it fell through the pavement. But underneath that, humiliation was something else. A slow, unsettling certainty that my mother had known this would happen. She had known what kind of people she had raised me around, and she had known I would need strength for what came after. As the sun finally crept in through the blinds, I pushed myself up, made a cup of coffee I did not drink, and sat at the table. The cup warmed my hands but not my chest. I kept thinking back to the last 2 years of my mother's life, and how everything had changed so quickly. 2 years earlier, I had been a project manager in New York. I lived in a high-rise studio with floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place people assumed meant you were doing well. But the truth was, I was barely keeping up. My job consumed every waking hour. My boss called at midnight. My anxiety felt like a roommate who never left the apartment. Then my mother received her diagnosis. Stage 4. No surgery, no miracle, only time, and not much of it. I remember sitting in her kitchen in Georgia, listening to the doctor, feeling the air drain out of the room. My mother reached for my hand, her fingers trembling only slightly. Don't panic, sweetheart. People live with worse things than truth. I did not understand what she meant, but I understood, without question, that I needed to be there. So I walked into my New York office the next day, handed in my resignation, and packed my life into 3 cardboard boxes. Everyone told me I was being dramatic, that I could hire a nurse, that she would understand, that I should not throw my future away. But a future without her did not feel like a future at all. When I moved home, Margaret did not look surprised. She looked annoyed that I was there, annoyed that I was about to disrupt the curated perfection she displayed to her country club friends. She had always been careful about how things looked from the outside. And cancer, especially the slow, gnawing kind my mother had, never looked pretty. Ethan and Lily never came home. Not once during the first 6 months. Ethan sent texts about being too tied up with financial audits. Lily posted inspirational quotes about resilience and authenticity, all while sitting poolside in Los Angeles. She occasionally called to ask how Mom was doing, but somehow every call turned into a monologue about brand deals and content schedules. The only one who cared was me. I became my mother's full-time caregiver. I learned to crush medication tablets into applesauce. I learned the names of nurses, and the smell of antiseptics, and the rhythm of fear when the monitor beeped too quickly. I slept in chairs. I cried in bathrooms. I drove to the pharmacy so many times that the pharmacist started packing the bags before I even said my name. And through all of it, Margaret floated in and out of the house like a ghost with expensive perfume. She was always too busy. Pilates in the morning, a luncheon at noon, dinner with friends in the evening. She stopped by my mother's room occasionally, but never long enough to be helpful, never long enough to look uncomfortable. Once, when I asked if she could sit with Mom so I could take a nap, she sighed dramatically and said, "You cannot expect everyone to put their life on hold, Hannah. You chose this." Chose this. As if caring for the woman who raised me was a foolish hobby I picked up one afternoon. But my mother, she never made me feel foolish. Even on the worst nights, when the pain was sharp and her voice was fading, she would squeeze my hand and whisper, "Thank you for being here. I am not scared when you are close." Those nights bonded us in a way that nothing could break, not even death. I carried her to the bathroom when she could not walk. I sang quietly while she shivered through chemo. I held her hair when she vomited. I listened to her stories about when I was a child, stories she had never told before, little things she remembered, because love makes memory sharper. One night, she said something I still think about. "Sweetheart, the people who show up when life breaks you are the only people who matter." I wanted to believe she meant me. I think she did. But now, standing outside her funeral being declared dead to the family, I wondered if she had also meant something else. Something she had seen in Margaret, Ethan, and Lily long before I ever did. As the months passed, my mother's body grew weaker, but her mind stayed painfully clear. She paid attention to everything: who visited, who did not, who cared, who pretended. And then, one evening, about 2 weeks before she died, she looked at me with an exhaustion I had never seen before. Not just physical, something deeper, something final. "Hannah, when truth comes, stand still, do not run." I asked her what she meant, but she just brushed my hair back and smiled. That small, tired smile that made me wish I could carry every ounce of her pain myself. The truth I expected was death. The truth she meant, I was starting to realize, was something else entirely. Something that led Margaret to bar me from the church. Something that made Caldwell look at me with worry instead of sympathy. Something that would pull the ground out from under all of us. And now, looking back, I know this. My mother was not warning me about grief. She was warning me about betrayal. The kind that hides in a house long before the illness begins. The kind that grows roots thick enough to choke out everything else. And the kind that was finally, about to surface. I arrived at Caldwell's office the next afternoon with a knot in my stomach, the kind that felt too tight to be nerves and too familiar to be coincidence. The building was a quiet brick structure on the edge of town, the kind of place where serious matters happened behind heavy doors and drawn blinds. I had driven there in silence, replaying my mother's warning again and again. Stand still, do not run. But standing still was harder than it sounded, when every instinct in me wanted to flee from the unknown. The receptionist greeted me with a soft, sympathetic smile, like she already knew why I was here, like everyone knew except me. She led me down a narrow hallway to a private conference room. When I stepped inside, I stopped cold. The table was covered, not with flowers or condolences or anything gentle, but with folders, paper stacks, a laptop already open on its stand, sticky notes, recorded transcripts. It looked less like a lawyer preparing for a will reading and more like someone assembling a case file. Caldwell stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back. He turned when he heard the door. "Hannah, thank you for coming," he said. His voice was calm, but there was an undertone I could not read. Not pity, not fear, something sharper. I sat down slowly. "What is all this?" He did not answer right away. Instead, he closed the blinds, dimming the sunlight until the room felt smaller, more contained, more private. "Your mother was a very intelligent woman, Hannah," he finally said. "And she was not as helpless as she looked in the last months of her life." I swallowed. I knew that. She hid her pain so I would not worry. Caldwell shook his head. "No, I am not talking about pain. I am talking about awareness." He walked to the table, tapped one of the folders, and looked at me in a way that made my heart drop. "6 months before your mother passed, she hired a private investigator." I blinked. "A what? Why?" He opened the folder, spreading photographs across the table, like cards in a game I never agreed to play. At first, they were just images, grainy, time-stamped, ordinary. But then the meaning hit me like an open palm across the face. The pictures were of Ethan, in my mother's home office, at 3 in the morning, taking photos of financial documents, her property deeds, her bank account summaries, her signature on old insurance forms. I felt my breath catch. No, Ethan would never. Caldwell didn't flinch. "There is more." He clicked the laptop. A video file opened. There he was, my brother, in the same room, moving with confidence, opening drawers, flipping through folders like he had done it many times before. "Your mother suspected someone was trying to access her accounts, so she installed new security cameras, ones only she and I knew about." My voice shook. "So Ethan was stealing from her?" "Trying to," Caldwell said. "He attempted a wire transfer using her information. The bank stopped it before it went through." I covered my mouth. The room felt smaller again, like the walls were leaning in. Caldwell did not stop. "Your mother wanted to know the truth about everyone around her. About who would show up for her, and who would show up for her money." He opened another folder. This time, the photos were of Lily. I recognized her pink designer bag immediately, and the way she moved, always posing, even when no one was watching. But she was not posing. She was in my mother's bedroom, opening the medication drawer, removing bottles of painkillers, and slipping them into her bag. Caldwell placed a printed screenshot beside the photos, a listing on a resale marketplace. The username was familiar. Lily Lifestyle, selling prescription medication, $50 a pill. My hands trembled. She took Mom's medicine. She sold it." He nodded. "Your mother kept count of every missing pill. She knew." I felt something in me crack open. Something raw. I had spent nights begging my mother to let me take her to the hospital because she was in too much pain. Nights where she bit her lip so hard it bled. Nights I stayed awake because she couldn't sleep. And Lily had been profiting off that pain. Caldwell exhaled slowly, like he needed a moment before continuing. Then he reached for the final folder. "But the most serious concern your mother had was Margaret." My chest tightened. Inside the folder were bank statements, legal documents, signed authorizations, transfers to accounts in Florida, New York, and the Cayman Islands. $350,000. Gone. Your mother believed Margaret was preparing to liquidate her assets after she passed. There are also recordings. He pressed play again. Margaret's voice filled the room, cold, sharp, confident. "The sooner she goes, the sooner I can sell this damn place. Ethan will handle the money. Lily will take the rental properties, and I will finally have a life that matches what I deserve." I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. Caldwell sat down across from me, his face serious. "Your mother knew who loved her, and who did not. She knew who stayed, and who waited for her to die." I whispered, "Why are you showing me this? How does this relate to her funeral?" "Because, Hannah," he said softly, "your mother created a second will, one no one else knows about. Not Ethan, not Lily, not Margaret. And tomorrow morning, they will learn exactly what she knew, and exactly what she chose to do about it." My heart raced. Caldwell leaned forward. "And Hannah, whatever happens in that room, remember what your mother told you. Stand still. Do not run." His words echoed inside me like a slow drum. I understood now. Tomorrow would not be a funeral. It would be a reckoning. If you were in my place, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. The next morning arrived faster than I wanted. I slept less than an hour, maybe less than that. It was one of those nights where the mind keeps circling the same questions until dawn bleeds through the curtains. Questions like, what exactly did my mother leave behind? Why did Margaret keep me away so violently? And what truth was I about to walk into? At 9 a.m., I drove to Caldwell's office for the official reading of the will. The parking lot was already full. Too full. I recognized Ethan's sleek silver BMW, polished so aggressively, it reflected the sky. Lily's convertible sat next to it, top down, as if she wanted the world to admire the fact she drove a luxury car to her own mother's will reading. Then there was Margaret's navy blue Lexus, parked perfectly between the lines. She would never tolerate even an inch of imperfection, not in her car, not in her life, not in her family. I stepped out of my car quietly. No one noticed me at first. They were too busy arguing. Ethan was pacing near the glass doors, running a hand through his perfect hair. This better not take long. I have a meeting at noon. Lily stood beside him, adjusting her makeup with her phone camera. The lighting in here is horrible. I swear this building was designed by someone who hates influencers. Margaret shushed them sharply. Do not forget your roles. We grieve today. We stay composed. We honor Laura's memory. And once this is done, we will divide everything properly. Divide everything. She said it like sorting shopping bags after a sale. When she finally turned and saw me, her expression shifted instantly from smug control to cold contempt. Why are you here, Hannah? She stepped toward me, lowering her voice but sharpening it at the same time. This meeting does not concern you. Before I could answer, the door opened. It was Caldwell. Actually, Margaret, he said, his tone polite, but cutting. It concerns her more than anyone. He stepped aside and motioned for me to enter. Every eye followed me as I walked past them. I could feel the heat of their resentment, their irritation, their desperation. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere shifted. It was far more formal than I expected. 3 unfamiliar lawyers sat along the wall, their faces neutral. A court reporter prepared her equipment. 2 security guards stood near the door, one inside, one outside. And in the corner, pretending to read her notebook, was a journalist from the local paper. It felt less like a family meeting, and more like the start of a trial. We took our seats. Margaret and her children sat together at one side of the table. I sat alone at the other end. Caldwell stood between us like a referee. No one wanted, but everyone needed. Before we begin, he said calmly, I need everyone to acknowledge that this session will be recorded and that the documents presented are legally binding. We acknowledge, Margaret snapped. Get on with it. Caldwell opened a thick envelope and pulled out several papers. This, he said, is the last will and testament of Laura Marie Cooper, signed 19 days ago. The reaction was instantaneous. Margaret shot out of her chair. That is impossible. She was barely conscious at that point. That, Caldwell said without even looking at her, is factually incorrect. She was fully lucid. We have medical witnesses who can attest to that. He handed the document to the lawyers along the wall, and then returned to his place. Now, let us begin. He cleared his throat and read slowly. To my stepson, Ethan Cooper, I leave the sum of $1, to be paid in quarters, so that he may learn the value of small change before attempting to handle large ones. Ethan's jaw dropped. His face flushed red. What the hell is this? Caldwell ignored him. To my stepdaughter, Lily Cooper, I leave the sum of $1, to be paid in pennies, one for each time she visited me in my final year. A gasp escaped from Lily, not a delicate gasp, but an unfiltered sound of pure humiliation. That is not funny, she hissed. Caldwell continued. To my sister-in-law, Margaret Cooper, I leave the storage shed behind the orchard, which she despised so much, so that she may have a space that matches her heart, cold and empty. The room fell silent. And then Margaret exploded. This is fraud. This is fabricated. She turned to Caldwell, pointing a trembling finger. You expect me to believe Laura would leave me some rotten shed? Before Caldwell answered, he lifted a hand. There are conditions attached to these bequests. He turned on the laptop, and that is when the mask came off. The screen displayed the footage of Ethan sneaking into my mother's office, taking pictures of her documents. The angles were clear, the timestamps undeniable. Ethan jumped from his seat. This is fake. I was helping her reorganize. At 3 a.m, while she was hospitalized, Caldwell asked, arching a brow. Security guards stepped closer. Then came Lily's footage. Her pink bag, my mother's missing pain pills, the online listing with her username. Lily burst into tears immediately. I was going to pay her back. I needed them. Influencing is stressful. You do not understand how hard it is. Her voice cracked into incoherent sobbing. Then came Margaret. The transfers. The Cayman accounts. The phone recording of her talking about selling the house the moment my mother died. Margaret tried to maintain composure, but the blood drained from her face like water from a cracked cup. This is out of context, she choked out. Caldwell closed the laptop gently. All of this, he said, was reviewed and verified. Your mother requested it. She wanted the truth documented. She wanted the masks off before her estate was handled. I could barely breathe. Caldwell turned toward me. Now, Hannah, this next part concerns you. Everyone looked at me. Your mother created a trust, separate from the will. She named me executor. She instructed me to reveal the terms only at this meeting. My pulse hammered. Your mother left you everything. The house, the land, the investments, the rental properties, and the beach home she purchased last year without telling anyone. The room erupted. Ethan cursed. Lily sobbed harder. Margaret slammed her palm on the table. But Caldwell raised a hand, silencing them with surprising authority. She left Hannah everything, he said, because she was the only one who showed love without expecting a return, the only one who stayed. I sat frozen, not victorious, not triumphant, just stunned, because in that moment, I realized the truth. This was not revenge, this was justice. And justice, when it finally arrives, is louder than any funeral bell. For a few seconds after Caldwell finished speaking, the room didn't feel real. It was as if the air thickened, pressing against my ears, muting everything except the pounding of my own heartbeat. Margaret stood frozen, one hand still planted on the table, her fingers trembling. Ethan stared straight ahead like someone trying to process a language he had never learned. Lily's crying had shifted from performative sobs to something raw and panicked, the kind that doesn't stop once it starts. I stayed still, the way my mother told me to. It felt like the only thing anchoring me in a room that was unraveling by the second. Margaret reacted first. Absolutely not, she snapped, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation. You cannot expect me to accept this. Laura was not in her right mind. She was sick. She was manipulated. Caldwell lifted a hand, calm in a way that made her fury look childish. Mrs. Cooper, he said, the will is legally binding, the trust is airtight, and everything we reviewed today is supported by verified evidence. Margaret's jaw clenched. Her eyes darted to the lawyers along the wall, then to the journalist in the corner, whose pen was flying across the page. Realizing she was being documented, Margaret straightened her posture and lowered her voice, attempting to gather the shreds of dignity slipping through her fingers. We will contest this, she said through clenched teeth. All of it. You may try, Caldwell replied evenly, but your chances are non-existent, and if you do, the evidence presented today will become public record. I imagine that would be inconvenient. The implication hung in the air like a blade. Ethan shot out of his chair so fast it nearly toppled. This is insane. You think I'm going to let some— He stopped himself before the word slipped, but his meaning was clear. Something cruel. Something about me. Caldwell didn't give him the chance. Mr. Cooper, he said, that attempted wire transfer linked to your IP address has been forwarded to your employer, as required by law. They requested the evidence 30 minutes ago. Ethan's face drained of all color. What evidence? Who requested it? His firm, Caldwell answered. Financial institutions tend to take fraud very seriously, particularly when it involves vulnerable individuals. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed again. Rage flickered across his eyes, but underneath it was something else. Fear. The kind that comes when a man realizes that money and charm will not save him this time. He sank back into his chair, silent. Then came Lily. She was staring at the table, her mascara streaked down her cheeks like black vines. Every few seconds, she tried to inhale deeply, but it came out broken. This will ruin me, she whispered. My brand, my sponsors, my reputation. People online destroy you for less. If they find out about the pills, about the videos. Caldwell turned toward her gently, not kindly, but professionally. Miss Cooper, your actions were documented. Your mother chose to include them. What happens next will depend on whether you take responsibility or continue pretending. Lily flinched like the words were blows. You don't understand, she cried. Without my image, I have nothing. You can't ask me to accept this. Your mother didn't ask you to accept anything, Caldwell replied. She asked for the truth to be known. Silence settled. Thick, icy. Margaret pressed her palms to her temples, like she was holding her head together. Laura was ungrateful, she muttered. I gave her a home. I cared for her. You stole from her, Caldwell cut in, his voice dropping to a steel-edged softness. You took her money. You isolated her. You planned to liquidate her estate while she was still alive. I have the dates, the transfers, the calls, and your own words. He tapped the laptop. Those recordings will remain sealed unless you force us to use them. Margaret sat back, stunned into silence. For the first time in my life, I saw Margaret as something other than powerful. She looked small, older, like her own lies had finally wrapped around her ankles and pulled her to the floor. The journalist in the corner finally spoke, her voice steady. Mr. Caldwell, is this information relevant to the ongoing investigation with the state tax board? The room froze. Investigation, Ethan whispered. What investigation? Caldwell didn't hesitate. Mrs. Cooper contacted the tax board 6 months ago in an attempt to devalue Laura's properties. However, the records she used were falsified. When the board reviewed the documents this morning, they discovered irregularities. They are now conducting a full audit. Margaret inhaled sharply. That is not possible. It is not only possible, Caldwell said, stepping back. It is already underway. No one spoke for a long time. Then, quietly, almost too quietly, Margaret said, She did this. Laura did this to punish me. Caldwell shook his head. No, she did this to protect Hannah. And just like that, every emotion in the room shifted. The anger, the panic, the humiliation. They all turned toward me like heat from a broken furnace. But I didn't look away. I didn't defend myself. I didn't apologize. I remembered, stand still, do not run, because this wasn't revenge, it was truth. And the truth has a way of burning loud enough for everyone to hear. The meeting ended with no goodbyes, no apologies, no attempts at reconciliation. Margaret stormed out first, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. Ethan followed, his phone pressed to his ear, voice shaking as he tried to reach someone, anyone who could clean up the mess he made. Lily lingered a moment longer, her eyes swollen, her voice small. Why did she love you more? I didn't answer. Some questions don't deserve answers. When the door clicked shut behind the last of them, the room felt lighter. Not peaceful, but lighter. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours, maybe days. And I understood something my mother had tried to teach me, long before she died. People reveal who they are when they think no one is watching. But they reveal even more when they think they have already won. If you think they deserved every bit of what finally came for them, go ahead and like this video. Your support tells me these stories still matter. When I stepped out of Caldwell's office, the sky had already shifted. A gray, heavy kind of afternoon, the kind where the clouds look swollen with rain but refuse to break. The air felt thick, as if the world itself needed a moment to absorb everything that had just happened. I took a long breath and reminded myself that this wasn't victory. It wasn't even relief. It was simply the truth settling in the space where lies had lived for too long. On my way to the parking lot, I saw them Margaret, Ethan, and Lily clustered near the sidewalk. None of them were speaking. They looked like 3 statues carved out of different shades of denial. Margaret gripped her purse so tightly her knuckles went white. Ethan stared at the ground like someone trying to calculate his way out of a nightmare. Lily kept swiping her fingers under her eyes even though her mascara had already surrendered hours ago. For the first time in my life, none of them looked big. None of them looked powerful. None of them looked like the people who used to make me feel small. They saw me approaching. For a second, no one moved. No hostility, no accusations. Just silence, the kind that comes after a storm, when everyone is finally forced to face what's left standing. Margaret spoke first. You planned this, you and Laura both. You poisoned her against us. I didn't respond, because answering her would only give her a place to throw her anger, and I didn't come here to catch the pieces of a life she shattered herself. I simply walked past them and unlocked my car. That small act, the quietness of it, must have enraged her more than any argument could, because behind me, I heard her voice break. "This isn't over, Hannah. People like you don't get the last word." But my mother hadn't left me the last word. She'd left me the last truth. And they couldn't outrun that. The next few days were a blur of signatures, filings, and slow realizations. Caldwell walked me through every step: transfers, titles, deeds, beneficiary documents. I had always imagined inheriting meant something cold and transactional. But this didn't feel like collecting assets. It felt like opening drawers filled with things my mother wanted me to know. The first time I drove up the gravel road leading to the house I grew up in, I felt a knot in my throat. The white shutters, the porch swing, the little patch of lavender she insisted on planting every spring. It all looked exactly the same, but the silence was different. Before I stepped inside, Caldwell turned to me. "Hannah, your mother also wanted you to find this." He handed me a small envelope, my name written in her handwriting. Soft and shaky at the end, but unmistakably hers. I didn't open it yet. I couldn't, not while standing on the threshold of a life she had just handed back to me. Inside, the house smelled like her. Not perfume, she'd stopped wearing it once treatments began, but the soft scent of lavender lotion and the faint warmth of cinnamon she used in her tea. Everywhere I touched, I expected her hand to still be there. I walked room to room in silence, not mourning, not celebrating, just trying to understand how grief and inheritance could exist in the same air. In the living room, I found a stack of folders neatly arranged on the coffee table. Caldwell had placed them there earlier. "These are the things she wanted you to see first," he said. They weren't bank statements, or tittles, or property lists. They were stories, letters she had written, notes she had left, lists of things she wanted fixed in the house. Books she didn't finish reading but wanted me to read for her. Recipes she hoped I'd cook one day. She left me instructions. But not for the money. For the healing. I spent hours reading through everything until the sun dipped low behind the orchard. And then I remembered something Caldwell told me at the end of the meeting. "Your mother prepared you for this far longer than you know." That sentence stayed with me. 3 days later, the real consequences began to roll in. Ethan lost his job, not quietly, but publicly. His firm issued an official statement that mentioned internal fraud review. By the next morning, every trace of him had been scrubbed from their website. Lily went live on social media, crying about betrayal, toxic family, and misunderstandings. But the comments weren't sympathetic. People had already seen the articles. Screenshots of her medicine listings resurfaced. Within hours, her partnerships froze. Brands detached themselves faster than she could refresh her notifications. And Margaret, her fall was the loudest. The IRS audit wasn't waiting. Her accounts were frozen. Her cards declined. The country club revoked her membership before dinner service. Even her closest friends, women who once clung to her like moths to a chandelier, stopped answering her calls. She went from superiority to isolation in less than a week. People call it karma. My mother called it truth catching up. That evening, I finally opened the letter. "Sweetheart, if you are reading this, then the storm has already passed. People will tell you that strength is loud. They are wrong. Sometimes strength is choosing silence when others expect you to fight. Sometimes strength is letting the truth walk on its own feet. Be kind, be steady. And do not waste your life being angry at people who never understood you." I folded the letter gently. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the first breath of it. And I realized something. My mother didn't leave me money. She left me freedom. Freedom from them. Freedom from fear. Freedom to finally live a life that didn't require permission. And that was the beginning of everything that came next. The first morning I woke up in my mother's house, it didn't feel like mine yet. The walls were familiar, the floors creaked in the same places, and the light came through the kitchen window just the way I remembered. But everything felt slightly hollow. like a room waiting for someone to speak into it. I walked through the hallway slowly, trailing my fingers along the wooden railing my mother used to dust every Sunday. She had always said a house doesn't become a home until you leave a piece of yourself in it. For years, this place had been filled with her laughter, her routines, her gentle way of making even ordinary mornings feel warm. Now it was my turn to figure out what to fill it with. I spent the first few days doing small things, fixing the squeaky cabinet in the kitchen, reorganizing the medicine drawer that still smelled faintly of peppermint rub, watering the plants she could no longer take care of near the end. It sounds simple, but small acts restore more than we think. Every task felt like stitching a piece of the house back together, thread by thread. Caldwell stopped by on the fourth morning with another stack of documents, but he didn't stay long. "Everything is moving into your name exactly as she planned," he said. Then, pausing at the doorway, he added, "She trusted you with more than her estate, Hannah. She trusted you with her legacy." When he left, those words followed me like a soft echo. Legacy. People say it like it's a mountain you have to climb, or a burden you have to carry. But my mother never saw it that way. To her, legacy was something simple, something human, something rooted in how you treat people when no one is watching. I understood that fully a week later, when I visited the orchard behind the house. The trees stretched back farther than I remembered. Rows of apple and peach trees blooming pale green under the early spring light. As a child, I used to help my mother pick fruit every summer. She always said the orchard was her favorite place, because life made sense there. Things grew, things healed, things started again. Now I understood why she fought so hard to protect this land. I spent hours walking between the rows, breathing in the quiet. And somewhere between those trees, the plan started forming, not for revenge. Not for proving anything to Margaret or Ethan or Lily, but for building something new from the pieces of what my mother left. The first step was the rental cottages behind the orchard. 3 small homes my mother once used as affordable rentals for local families. They were simple places, slightly weathered, but full of charm. Margaret had planned to raise the rent the moment my mother died. But when I stepped inside the first cottage, where a single mother lived with her son, I knew my mother's intention. She didn't want profit, she wanted safety. So I kept the rent exactly where it was. Then I added something extra, a program where tenants could earn rental credits by volunteering at the community center, helping seniors, tutoring kids, planting trees in the park. Their reactions were a kind of gratitude I had never seen before. Quiet, genuine, unpolished. One woman hugged me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Your mother saved us once. I guess you're saving us again." I couldn't speak for a long moment after that. The second step came unexpectedly. On a Wednesday afternoon, I found a dusty old binder in my mother's sewing room. Inside it were notes, names, dates, phone numbers, sketches of project ideas she never got to finish. At the very back was a page labeled, "For later," "For after me," "For Hannah." My throat tightened as I read the ideas she had written. A community orchard day. A summer program for teens needing work experience. A small scholarship for local girls pursuing healthcare careers. A caregiver rest retreat 3 weeks by the coast. The last one hit me hardest, because I knew exactly why she wrote it. She saw what caregiving did to me, how it drained me, how it isolated me, and she didn't want anyone else to go through that alone. The beach house she left me, the one she never mentioned, it wasn't a luxury. It was a refuge she dreamed of building for people like us, people who loved someone through sickness, people who needed a place to breathe again. By the end of the week, I drove to see the house. The wooden steps creaked as I walked up to the porch, and the ocean wind carried a smell of salt and memory. Inside, the house was simple but bright, soft colors, quiet rooms, sunlight dancing on the floor. It felt exactly like her. I stood at the window overlooking the water and whispered, "I know what you wanted me to do with this, and I will." The third step was the hardest, letting people back into my life. When my mother fell ill, my world had shrunk down to 2 people, her and me. Now that she was gone, the silence felt bigger than the house itself. But grief is not meant to be a room you live in forever. It is a hallway you walk through. So when Miguel, my mother's old orchard foreman, invited me for Sunday dinner with his family. I went. When Donna from the office dropped off a pie and insisted I come by the company soon, I said I would. When Dr. Reeves, the physician who witnessed my mother's will, asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime and talk about the caregiver retreat idea, I didn't say no. Healing happens slowly, then suddenly, just like grief. Every night, I ended my day on the porch swing, holding my mother's letters, reading one piece at a time. They didn't make the world easier, they just made it clearer. And that clarity taught me something. Revenge wasn't the point, justice wasn't the destination. Legacy was. And I was finally learning how to carry it. The first time I visited my mother's grave after everything settled, the wind was gentle, not cold like the day of her funeral, not harsh like the days that followed, just soft, like it understood something I didn't yet have words for. The cemetery sat on a small hill, overlooking the edge of town. Wildflowers dotted the grass in uneven patches, the way my mother always liked them, natural, unplanned, free. I brought a fresh bundle of lavender, the kind she used to dry in the kitchen to make the house smell warm. As I reached the headstone, I sat down on the bench she had chosen years ago. She used to joke about it, saying she wanted a bench so her loved ones wouldn't leave too quickly. I guess even in death, she knew how to make people stay a little longer. I rested the lavender against the stone and breathed in the quiet. "Hi, Mom," I said softly. "I wish you could see everything now." But then again, maybe she could. The orchard was thriving. The cottages were full of families who finally felt safe again. The scholarship fund had just been announced, and 3 young women were already preparing their applications. And the beach house, the one she kept secret, was slowly being transformed into a caregiver retreat. I spent 2 weekends scraping old paint off the porch railing. It felt good to work with my hands again, to build something, instead of just trying to hold things together. People started showing up for me, too. Miguel and his wife made sure I never spent a Sunday alone. Donna called every morning just to ask if I'd had breakfast. And Dr. Reeves, well, one coffee turned into 2. Then into long conversations about life, loss, and what comes after a heart breaks but keeps beating anyway. I didn't expect connection to grow so quickly. But maybe that's how healing works. Not all at once, not loudly, just steadily, like a tide coming back in after a long night. As I sat there at my mother's grave, I realized something I had overlooked through all the chaos, all the anger, all the truth that finally surfaced. My mother didn't leave me an inheritance. She left me a direction. Money can disappear. Houses can collapse. Titles fade. Even names can be rewritten by people desperate to control a story. But the kind of love she gave, the kind that sacrifices, that shows up, that stays even when staying hurts, that kind of love leaves a mark deeper than any engraving on a stone. I ran my fingers across her name. You were right, Mom. About everything. People reveal themselves in the hardest seasons. Margaret moved into that old orchard shed after the IRS froze her accounts. It wasn't revenge. It was simply where her own choices led. Ethan started working at a car rental desk at the airport. Maybe he'll learn humility there. Lily, still trying to piece together her online presence, finally posted something real about the pain she caused. I don't know if her followers forgave her, but forgiveness was never mine to give or withhold. And me, I was learning to live again, not in reaction to them, not in comparison to anyone, but in the quiet way my mother taught me, to show up, to rebuild, to love without expecting applause, to stand still when the truth arrives. I leaned back on the bench, letting the sunlight fall across my face. A single leaf drifted down from the tree above and landed on the ground beside me. For a moment, it felt like a sign, subtle, small, but gentle, in the way only life can be when it stops demanding and starts teaching. "Mom," I whispered, "I hope I'm honoring you the way you wanted." A breeze moved through the branches. Maybe it was just the wind, but it felt like an answer. I stood and brushed dirt from my hands. As I walked back toward the gate, I realized something final, something I think my mother wanted me to understand long before she died. The real inheritance isn't what we receive, it's what we become because of the love someone gave us. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt like I was becoming someone she would be proud of. Before I got back into my car, I glanced once more at the hill, the flowers, the quiet, and I thought of everyone who might be listening to my story now, people who have survived their own betrayals, their own storms, their own families that never saw their worth. If you're still here, still listening, maybe that means you understand something about the weight of truth and the strength it takes to carry it. And if my mother's story, and mine, reminds you that even the deepest wounds can become something meaningful one day, then I hope you stay with me a little longer. If you believe stories like this help us heal piece by piece, I invite you to subscribe, not for me, but for the reminder that we are all still learning how to carry our own inheritance, in our own way,